For more insights into the costs of these winter storms in Texas, my colleague Rachelle Akuffo spoke to Steven Bowen. He's head of Catastrophe Insight at insurance company AON, and he starts by talking about how much of the state has been affected.
Every county within Texas was affected, and in fact, the cold air didn't stop at the border. Even in parts of northern Mexico, there were temperatures that were well below freezing, which has led to some pretty significant impacts. So this was one of the most intense winter storm slash cold events that the state of Texas has seen, and across most of the southern plains in the U.S. In a matter of decades. This is way, way colder than what we saw in 2011 and in 1989. But the impact has certainly been very, very substantial, and the fact that so many more people are now living in the state of Texas as opposed to how many they did in the late 80s, there's just way more people that were directly affected.
And as you mentioned, it has been decades, so this isn't the first time that Texas has seen this sort of cold snap and for this long. So a lot of people wondering then, with the loss of power, of heat for a lot of people, what sort of price tag could we be looking at?
Well, it's going to take many weeks until we get a final number, but there's no question that we're going to be talking about dollars well into the billions. In fact, we're expecting on the insurance front a number of insurance claims that would rival or surpass some of the biggest hurricanes that we've seen come through the state of Texas. So I would not be surprised if we do see a number of claims that surpasses even Hurricane Harvey from 2017. Now, how much that's going to directly translate into insurance payments, it's still a bit too early to know for sure, but we're certainly going to be talking about losses likely in excess of $10 billion.
So then why do you think Texas was so unprepared, and what was it about the response that fell short?
Well, it was a really challenging situation in the sense that the utilities apparently did not what we call winterize their infrastructure, which really allowed it to be very vulnerable to this type of extended outage. And given that how many people were affected and just how prolonged this cold snap was, it really did set off a chain of very challenging dominoes that were falling down because of the grid basically being shut down. So, there's a lot that needs to be done in terms of what you do for the next event, because we know now that it's happened. This is a bit unprecedented, but now there is an example that we can point to and say that this is where the investment needs to go. This is what we need to do. We need to make sure that we're winterizing and prepared. So when the next big event happens, whether it's a cold snap or whether it's another hurricane, that the infrastructure in place is better suited.
So then what sort of upgrades to the power grid or other sort of infrastructure changes are really needed now that we have this very harsh lesson that's been learned?
Well, Texas is very unique in the sense that it's essentially on its own grid. The rest of the country is either tied to the eastern part of the country, the grid there, or the western part of the country. So if one country or one state tended to get affected, you could basically tap into other states' electricity and at least help navigate some of the risks that it's faced. But with Texas, when that grid went down, they're on their own. So it's going to take a long time to actually rebuild the grid, try to build it a bit smarter, start to look at the science and understand that climate change is likely to provide more challenges in terms of stress on the grid. So being able to build in some of these scientific studies to show what these weather scenarios may look like in the future, just to be better suited the next time something really anomalous does end up occurring.
And obviously at times like this, you really do draw on your community, some for better or worse. What are you seeing in terms of first things like price gouging, concerns there being that there are limited resources that a lot of people are clamoring for?
Yeah, that's always a concern with every major disaster. You tend to see some businesses try to take advantage of others and really skyrocket their prices, which in turn leads to usually charges that gets filed because that is illegal. But what's really challenging with this in particular is we're still in the COVID-19 environment. And coming out of 2020, where we saw the price of lumber was at record levels, we saw that there just was a flat-out shortage of a lot of different construction materials. So when it comes to that, there may be prolonged periods in terms of when people can get their home fixed, but also just the costs around it. It just costs more because unfortunately the supply is low and the demand is high, and typically that does lead to a bit of a price correction. So it's a really, really tough time for everybody involved.
And on the bright side, are we seeing much in terms of sort of charitable efforts and giving to try and support the people of Texas?
Of course, you know, there are, of course, national, international organizations like the Red Cross, which are great. There's also, you know, go to your local, you know, charities, see where there's places you can donate food or blankets or something to help people get back on their feet. Obviously, donations, financial donations are great for people you know, who may not have insurance, that are going to need financial assistance to help get back on their feet. So I would, you know, obviously the Red Cross is a great place to start, but there's certainly more targeted local charities as well that are doing a lot of great things.
Now, I want to now also talk about President Biden and him offering this Texas Disaster Relief Declaration. What exactly does that cover, and is it enough at this point?
So the declaration allows a lot of federal resources to come in. You can have National Guard members get involved and help people start to rebuild and take assessments of the damage that's been done. But I think one area that we need to understand is that any federal assistance is not meant to be a complete stopgap for insurance. So if you don't have insurance, unfortunately, you're likely to get a check from the government that's not nearly covering the full amount of the damage that you may have incurred. So it's definitely a good thing. Anything is going to help in this situation, but it may not be as much as everyone may want it to be, or it should be.